Okay, now we're going to begin the rendering for our Speedform. What we're going to need is we're going to need at least 3 shades of the same color. Now, something about picking marker colors that you have to be aware of. You cannot just go by the name, and you cannot just go by the number. So if you look at these numbers, for me, the lightest shade will be B32, followed by a B24 and a B26. Now, when you go and pick markers from the store, you have to be careful, okay? You cannot just assume that it follows any sequence. Like it'll go 24, 25, 26. They must match. It doesn't. You need to physically test it and see that there's a separation of color between the light, the medium, and the dark. Now, sometimes if you really want to get it really punchy, we can get that 4th color in there. But you got to make sure there's a good separation of all the colors. I'm going to go ahead and do a quick swipe for you and show you what we're going to do with it, okay? Now, I have no fear. I'm going to start right away with the dark color, okay? I'm just going to swipe it. That's B39, followed by a B26, followed by a B24, followed by a B32. I've already pre-tested all these colors, so I know that they kind of work for me. Now, I'm going to do a quick test here for you so you can see what we're going to do with the larger form here, okay? Once I've laid the basic color down, what I'm going to do is go ahead and go a second pass over that color and a half swipe into the next lighter color. Then I'm going to start here again, and don't be afraid to go into the dark. It's not going to affect anything. And go a half swipe into the next color up. And then from there, we're going to try to blend this set together. So I'm going to go back and forth a little bit to help the blend. And while you kind of got it moist and kind of wet on the paper, that's the best time to drag the color. So you notice that I've kind of got a blend going on here as far as the color goes. So that's what we're ultimately going to be doing to this form, okay? Now, we're going to be doing a shiny marker rendering here. When I say shiny, I want to see a lot of the reflection lines that it's catching, these kind of distortions in the surface because it's so shiny. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we're going to start off with the core. Don't panic about it. I know marker is a little bit of a scary thing, but we're going to lay the core down first, okay? Okay, so there's my darkest section, which is the core. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this little hook and snap it and snap it. Then I'm going to do one for the rear and snap it and snap it. Be careful when you're doing these hooks. They're not just little hooks like this. I literally snap my hand back and pull it near the farther edges, and I only need 2. Don't go crazy with it, okay? Now, what I'm going to do here is that I want to add a little bit of motion to my form. Like I want it to feel like it's fast. So what I can do is add a little bit of speed line. Now this takes a little bit of practice to get this done right because it just looks much more interesting and it looks like this form is in motion that's passing by a lot of things. Now, because I don't want to lose these details from the speed line, I'm going to skip the next color, which would have been B26. If I wanted a studio lighting situation where everything is perfectly lit and smooth, I would have gone straight to the next color. But because I don't want to lose the detail, I'm going to skip B26 and go to B24. And what I'm going to do is render the lower half of the object first. See, so B24, it's 1 shade off, but notice I get to keep all the details. Okay, now from there, I'm going to go to a B32 and kind of fade away the lower half of the object. And the reason that it's lower, it's technically getting reflective light from the ground. So it's reflecting whatever the brightness of the table was back onto the object. Okay, so now I'm going to start with the wraparound side, the side that wraps around that top edge. Now, because the core was here, there would have been another chord directly opposite from it, just as dark, but it's hidden behind the form. But as we work our way around it and it comes up, now we're going to address it. So I'm going to take out the B39. We're not going to see that. I'm going to start with the B26, but I just want to give it a little bit of an edge right here. Now with the marker, most of the time I can do everything with the chisel tip. I can make a thin line, I can make a medium line, I can make a broad line. So knowing how to work the marker, I'm just going to hold the edge. And what I want to do is just give it a little bit of value that shows that it's just a little bit darker on that corner of the edge. Now sometimes if I really wanted to, I can even give it a slight indication line. Okay? Now from there, now I'm going to blend it over. Now I'm about to pass the center line, which I got to be careful about, okay? And remember, the faster you move, the less it will bleed. See the indication line right there? So what I want to do is create this gradation that's rolling around the top of the object. Now remember, here is my bright area, so I'm going to try not to interfere with that. Because the faster you move, the less it will bleed. And so we kind of want that full spectrum of color. So it looks like there is a gradation rolling around the top now. Now, to bring it, the bottom core upwards, I'm going to try to meet that hot streak. Now, just for some interest, maybe we can add a little bit of something to this top edge here. Generally, I like to do something like a cityscape, a mountain range, maybe some little detail that shows some interest here. So if I'm going to do this kind of a mountain range, I kind of want to keep it low. I want to keep it wide, okay? We don't want any teepees. Okay, and an easy way to do this is just take your darker value and just kind of block in that area. So I'm just going to go ahead and block in the area and leave some of my cool reflection lines behind. So don't worry if that's showing as like a wider area. It's fine. See? So now it looks like you're zooming past some kind of a landscape. Okay, now same rule applies here. Remember, I would have gone straight to B26 if this were a studio situation and everything was all perfectly blended. But I'm going to skip that. I'm going to go straight to B24 because I want to leave some of those details behind. Okay, so now look as I'm rendering it. This is kind of a monochromatic rendering. So from B24, I'm going to go to B32. And what I'm after here is that I'm trying to gradate following the pattern from front to back. So the faster you move, the less it will bleed. And you'll be able to get a smoother rendering out of it. So just go back and do some minor touch-ups if you feel like you need to adjust it slightly. Okay. So you see how we've created that white hot streak behind? That's that blinding white area that you're seeing. Now, to touch this up and finish this out, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a couple of small hooks to the very edge of this. And what that does for me, it shows that the object is closing up where the hot streak is. And so now we kind of have a rendered form. It looks 3D, and we've shown enough value that it's rolling around. It looks like it's roundished. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a indigo blue Prismacolor pencil. This seems to work pretty well for me. And what I need to do is I actually need to touch up the form. Everything you do needs slight touch up at the end to just clean up the lines. The majority of this was already pretty smooth and pretty easy to do, but this will just add an extra dimension to it. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and touch up my form. Okay, now when I touch up the center line, what's most important is the front part of the center line. That's the part that needs the most impact. The strongest line, and then it can fade away. Now when I do the wraparound, the contour lines, I'm going to hook it. I like to throw the dot as part of a technique. Hook it. Hook it. And on the other side, make sure you're wrapping it. Make sure you're wrapping it. Make sure you're wrapping it. Okay, now if you really need to, and sometimes you don't, I can just add a little bit of light shading to really get that wraparound feeling that there is indeed a gradation and color change in the object. So you see how I just add a little bit of light shading here, and it brings up the effect dramatically. So when I do some light shading on the bottom, I can just gently touch up that core area just to give it a little bit more depth. It's not always necessary, but sometimes, you know, it just looks a little bit better when you add it. Okay, so now we've got the rendering initially finished. What I can do now with the shadow, I can do it traditionally with the gray markers like we did with the geometric forms, but I'm going to make this all monochromatic, meaning that it's all just going to be blue in one color. Okay, now I've already sketched out what my shadow looks like, but do you remember how we did the spheres? How it's like rings of a tree. The closest parts near the center here are the darkest. Then it gets lighter and lighter and lightest near the edges. So since I see almost nothing of that area, I'm just going to add just a little bit of color in the middle here, just to hold a little bit of an edge. Okay. And then when I get near the back and the front, I want it raised. So it's a very light kind of faded, faint color. And that establishes that it's raised up. All the dark parts of the shadow are being sat on by the form. So that's why we don't see so much darkness in the shadow. All we see are the edges that are peeking out. But if you want to, you can always add just a little bit of value just to hold it. And so we are doing a monochromatic object that is shiny. And we're just going to touch up that outer edge just a little bit to show that it's faded. Okay, and this concludes our rendering for the shiny, glossy objects.